Okay, everything that Tim just said, I agree with. Thank you. No, wait, let me add something to that. Okay, the one thing that Tim said that I think is really important. Up until 100 years ago, American chestnut was the most prominent tree in the eastern United States forest, right? This was like the giant redwood of the East. American chestnuts were the fastest growing and the largest growing tree in the East Coast. Trees would reach 100 feet tall, average 5 feet in diameter. Some of them reached 12 feet in diameter. The biggest one that we know about was 17 feet in diameter. That was here in western North Carolina. You could drive a car through that tree if somebody hollowed a tunnel out of it first. But this was a really important tree. It wasn't just big. We used it for all of our timber. It was this beautiful, easy to work with, rot-resistant wood, right? So this was one of the most important trees from the timber standpoint. They would build everything out of American chestnut. It also produced large, massive nuts every year, more nuts than any other tree. This was a nutritional mainstay for humans, livestock, and wildlife, right? So when Tim talked about American chestnut as a keystone species, it's because it was so ecologically significant. When a tree is that big and that numerous, it's playing an important role in the ecosystem. We don't know exactly all the details about it because people weren't collecting data back then, but we know it was important. And you guys are studying environmental science right now in your class, and you obviously know about how all these different parts of our environment are interacting, right? So it wasn't just a tree that was important for timber. It wasn't just a tree that produced a lot of nuts. It was interacting with the ecosystem in a big way. So this was a really important tree. We know it was. It was important ecologically. It was important economically. It was important culturally. This tree was a big, beautiful tree, and about 100 years ago, it was impacted by an accidental introduction of this thing called chestnut blight. And it took about 50 years to wipe it out, right? It went from all the stature and prominence of a big tree with a big, beautiful crown to scattered stump sprouts growing at the bases of long dead trees. 50 years, just think about that. There were 4 billion trees. Now we've got stump sprouts here and there, occasional big tree that people plant, but as Tim said, the trees, they grow, they die. They put out new stump sprouts, and that's really important to us. The fact that this tree still exists as little stump sprouts has made it possible for us to do the work that we're doing at the American Chestnut Foundation, because what those stump sprouts offer us is it offers us genetic material to work with. And here's what I mean. We take some of those stump sprouts, we get them a little bit big, just big enough, we want them to live just long enough so that we could pollinate with them. And we crossed the American chestnuts that we found surviving with Chinese chestnuts. Now, why do you guys think we crossed them with Chinese chestnut? How come?
Chinese are resistant.
So they evolved with the same pathogen, right? So the Chinese chestnut is resistant to that pathogen. So if we could take the Chinese chestnut and hybridize it with an American chestnut, we get a tree that has some resistance to the blight. The only problem is that tree looks an awful lot like a Chinese chestnut tree. And they're not as good. They don't grow as tall, they don't grow as big, they don't do all the things that we love about American chestnuts. They're a little bit of a different tree. Well, we want an American tree. So then what we do is we take the progeny from that tree. You guys know what progeny is? It's the children from those trees. So we take an American and a Chinese, and the children trees that they produce, we plant those, and when those get big enough, we cross those with more American trees. Now we have trees that are a little bit more American. And we do that again and again and again until we get trees that look exactly like an American chestnut tree. And I'm not just saying that it's like an American chestnut tree because the leaves look like an American chestnut tree or the twigs look like an American chestnut tree. This thing acts like a chestnut tree. It produces the same nuts. It's a timber quality tree. It breaks dormancy the right time of year. Chinese break dormancy too early, which makes them susceptible to frost. We don't want that. We want a tree that doesn't just look like an American, but it acts like an American in every way except it's got blight resistance. It will survive the blight. It's still going to get it, but Chinese trees get the blight too, right? It's like the cold. You know, we can get the cold and we can overcome it, just like a Chinese chestnut tree can get blight and overcome it, right? The only problem is just like our ability to resist a cold, chestnut trees, and so our resistance to the cold might vary, right? One person might get really sick, and one other person might not even notice they have a cold, right? Because everybody's a little bit different. So the trees that we're producing are all a little bit different. So after 30 years and $30 million, like Tim talked about, we finally have this tree that we call the restoration chestnut. It has the blight-resistant genes, but because blight resistance is variable, we have to keep working on it. Because we don't want to keep the trees that have blight resistance, but they're kind of weak. We want trees that have blight resistance and are really, really strong. We want trees that are perfect, and we want lots of them so that we can get a lot of diversity. So we have a long way to go. So what we're doing here today is we're planting one of these trees, well, we're actually planting 5 of them. And what these trees represent is something really important. They represent 30 years of work and $30 million of investment, but what they also represent is a process. And this process has to keep going on. We have to keep breeding trees and selecting them and inspecting them and cutting out the ones that aren't good enough. So we're going to keep doing this for a long time so that we can get trees that are good enough to put in the forest. So this tree represents a lot of years of work, but it also represents hope for the future. Because we're not ready to restore this tree to the forest. We're ready to plant some in that field and then watch them and hope they do well. And if they don't do well, we need to know that. That's important information for this program, right? So you guys are going to monitor these trees. And if they get blight and they don't do well, you have to let me know so we can go in and take our notes and say, oh, okay, these trees aren't doing well. We got to cut them out. But these other trees are doing well. Let's make more of them. And we keep this process going. So it represents the future of this program. And what it also represents, it represents partnerships. You guys are helping. Tim's helping. Everybody here is helping, right? We all pitch in on this and we make it work. We couldn't do this without a collaborative effort. We need everybody. We need the volunteers. We need all of our members, right? We're a small nonprofit organization. There's like 10 people that are actually work for TACF. Everybody else is a volunteer. So we need all of you to do this. So this tree represents the partnerships that make this possible. So when we dream about a future where chestnut is back in the forest, this represents it because it represents all this science, but it also represents it because it represents all this interest and collaboration. And so just like Tim said, go and tell people about this. We need people to know about what we're doing because we can't do it without a lot of people. It represents one more thing. I'm going to tell you this and then I'm going to be done. Tim talked about hemlock woolly adelgid. That's just one thing. Chestnut blight is just one thing. There's thousands of things out there. All sorts of pathogens that we accidentally introduce. All sorts of insects that we accidentally introduce. We keep accidentally introducing these things that are a problem, right? And just like the hemlock tree is dying fast, and ash trees are dying fast, and all these other trees, you know, we've got all these things. Sudden oak death, thousand acre disease. Lots of problems out there because we accidentally introduce things. Well, what this tree represents is a template for how we can save those other species. This is one of the first trees that we've done this kind of work with. We've been doing it for 30 years. But now they're doing the same thing with hemlocks. And sooner or later, they're going to figure out a way to hybridize and backcross hemlock trees, and they're going to bring resistance to hemlock woolly adelgids into hemlock trees. And then they're going to do the same thing with ash trees, and they're going to do the same thing with oak trees. And they're going to do that with all these pathogens because we're creating a template, and we still don't know exactly, you know, all the solutions yet. We haven't figured it out exactly. But as we work through this process, we're informing people how to do it with other trees. So it's not just important that we're bringing back American chestnut. What we're doing is we're saving American forests. And that's what I think is really significant about the work we're doing. And it's because of you guys. So thank you all for everything you've done. And I'm really looking forward to planting these trees with all of you. Sure. So this tree, this is what we call a restoration chestnut. This is the offspring of a lot of trees that were hybridized and backcross and intercross and all this science, and a lot of genetics went into this. A lot of genetics, a lot of silviculture. So it's a lot of work, but the end result is this tree potentially has blight resistance, and I say potentially because, as I said, blight resistance is something that varies. We haven't figured out if this one is perfect or not yet, so we're going to watch it, we're going to find out. I hope this is the perfect tree, because one thing I'll point out is that this tree, if you saw a pure American chestnut tree and held it up to this tree, they look identical. It grows like an American chestnut. It's a nice straight timber tree. It's a beautiful tree. And you know, to be able to have a tree like this with blight resistance and look this beautiful, it's really impressive. And it's a lot of credit goes to our scientists who've been working on this for so long to be able to make a tree like this. But there it is.
Tell them how you can spot the leaves.
Russell's going to tell you something now.
I was just going to suggest, Tom, tell them about how you can identify a chestnut in your own forest.
Ah, sure.
Because a lot of these people
Okay. So you're going to see other trees out there that look similar to this tree. You know, beeches look pretty similar. Sawtooth oak. Okay. This tree, this leaf is what we call, it's kind of canoe shaped. That's how we identify this. If you saw a Chinese chestnut, it would be rounder. So when you see a leaf that looks like this, that's got teeth, look to see if it's got a nice canoe shape. And I think we could pass one of these around. Don't fall. Here, let's just set that back there.